Today I'm going to show you several techniques that I've found very helpful in working with railroad ties. I've done quite a bit of work with them. The current project that I'm showing you is a row of railroad ties to go at the top of a bank to be used as a boundary, a short retaining wall actually. As you know, railroad ties are pretty heavy and present a challenge when working by yourself. I think the techniques I'm going to show you will really help out if you have to be working by yourself, or even if you have a partner, which is even better. Here are some tools that will come in handy. Starting on the right side, a shovel obviously. Next is a T-bar, which is used for wire fencing or net fencing. This is a 5-foot T-bar. I saw it in half to use as a stake for the railroad tie. Next, a couple of rebar stakes and string. You'll see this will be used to try to keep the area prepared for the railroad tie to be nice and flat. Next is a large pry bar, which is useful in moving the railroad tie small distances. Next, the rope used on each end of the railroad tie for lifting. Then heavy hammer for hammering in the stakes. Next, some nice round cylinders of simple wood that will be used as rollers to shift the railroad tie lengthwise. Next, some knee pads that I find very useful. If your knees are tough, yeah, you don't need these. Next is a tamping tool that is made out of metal, very heavy. I use it to tamp the bed that I'm going to put the railroad tie in to get it nice and smooth. Probably not necessary, but it comes in useful. So I have my 5-foot T-bar here, and I've sawn about halfway through with a hacksaw. I can just bend it and it'll break off neatly at this point. So here you go. I bought 6 railroad ties from a local hardware store. They cost about $100 for the 6 of them. I was able to transport them in my little utility trailer. Wouldn't feel comfortable hauling more than 6, but 6 was exactly what I needed. I'm going to show you the first technique, which is to put a rope around the railroad tie at each end, which makes it easier to pick up end by end and also easier to drag, which I will do with my little tractor and a 3-point hitch. It's nice to have the 3-point hitch. I think this could probably be done with a garden tractor without a hitch, or a large riding lawnmower. Watch my technique and you'll see what I mean. I have used my pry bar to move the railroad tie I'm going to use apart from the others, just enough to get my rope around it. I've wrapped the rope around twice so that it won't slip off. I'll use this hook and my 3-point hitch then to lift this end of the railroad tie and drag it away. And here we go. Seems like the rope would slip off the end of that railroad tie, but I haven't had that happen yet, even as I go uphill and drag this railroad tie through the woods. Now I have my railroad tie in prime position uphill from the work site, and elevated it off the ground enough to slip my heavy-duty hand truck underneath about halfway, and it'll be easy to manipulate down the hill for the next step. Now the railroad tie is in a good position to slip a rope on the other end. These ropes come in handy when moving the railroad ties by hand, either one person or two people, for short distances in just positioning the tie. Notice I had to put a counterweight on the upper end of the hand truck to keep it from tipping forward. Also a couple of sticks under the wheels so it wouldn't roll downhill and really be a big problem. Now it's time to prepare the bed for this next railroad tie. As you can see, I have a string that will mark the level of the bottom of the next railroad tie. I've staked it about a couple of inches in front of the last one so that I'll have a little room to shovel. I will shovel all this out and then use my tamper to get the bed for the next railroad tie nice and smooth. This stake is about 9 feet from the end of the last railroad tie. Railroad ties are about 8.5 feet long, so this should give me a little room to maneuver if I carry my bed out to this point. So now I have dug down to the level of the string.
Now it's time for the tamping to smooth out the bed.
Okay, so I've prepared a bed for my next railroad tie. See, I placed the rollers in the bed so that I can shift the railroad tie right to left if needed. I have used a string to be a guide, first of all to make sure that my bed is straight, and secondly to make sure that it is level with respect to the string so that the railroad tie doesn't rock back and forth. So I've got my tie up there on the hand truck. I'll manipulate it downhill on the hand truck. That's actually the easiest part of this next maneuver. I've put a couple of big T-bars into the ground just to make sure the railroad tie doesn't roll down the hill. So we'll see how this goes. Now I'm ready to place this railroad tie. I was not able to get the railroad tie exactly even with its bed because of the little deer fence behind it. So I have it to one end of the bed, and I have my rollers in place to help me move the tie from right to left into its needed position.
Here's where the ropes come in handy, rather than having to squat and get hands underneath the tie. And I think you see what I mean. You can also see how the rollers work nicely. The rollers work best when the ground underneath has been tamped down and is smooth. If the tie has to be shifted any distance, you'll have to remove a roller from the back and place it in the front. Now the long pry bar is used to slightly lift the railroad tie to remove all the rollers. lifting and dropping each end of the tie will help it stabilize into the bed. The next sequence shows a problem and solution I ran into with a different tie.
And now I will get at the open end of the railroad tie and use my pry bar to push it with the help of the rollers to line up against the previously placed railroad tie. There, one little nudge with the tall pry bar pushed it right against the previously seated railroad tie. Now I'll use the same pry bar to lift one end of the railroad tie at a time and remove the rollers. Problem noted, the railroad tie I just put in is not quite as tall as the previous one. I'll solve this by elevating this end, slipping the right sized rock underneath, and then packing the dirt underneath the railroad tie to get it to the desired height. Since I work with rocks a lot, I had no trouble in finding a rock just about the right thickness to elevate the end of the new railroad tie to match the old one. So I'll elevate the end with my pry bar, slip this rock under, and see how it looks. Well, I have to tell you, the first rock I tried was too thin, as was the second. Third one was money. So now I put another rock further up, and now I'll pack dirt underneath with my long pry bar as far up the railroad tie as need be. Then I will put the stakes made from a cut-off T-bar. I'll use 2 of them as I did on the other railroad ties, and we'll be done. Except that I might come back with a little brown paint and make those T-bar stakes disappear. So there you go, the stakes are in place, angled into the hill a little bit, and taken down below the top of the railroad tie to prevent injury, just in case some grandkids' feet come tripping along on top of this, which I'm sure will happen. As I mentioned, I did use some brown spray paint to make the green T-posts disappear. From a little further away, they do in fact disappear. Now here's the finished product. My wife will be adding mulch. Here's the look from above. I plan on getting some filled dirt to bring the top edge up to the level of the railroad ties. But I was able to maintain a curve even though the railroad ties are straight. I ran the line to the edge of this deer fence and cut the last tie to create the angle I wanted. And again from this end, and now the finished product complete with mulch. The plants you see are mostly ajuga, which will eventually spread under the mulch, and they're doing a good job of stabilizing the bank. So we're done until the next project.